'Cause I have a question for you. I didn't want to take airtime, but where are you at in your process? When did you start the novel, and kind of where's it at right now?
For the novel that I just read from.
Correct. Yeah.
Um, I started it 2 months ago, and I'm about 60 or so pages in. So probably just under a quarter of the way through.
Am
Yeah.
I remembering correctly? I feel like we had lunch together and we were talking about Cuba, and it was right when Cuba was a little bit more open or becoming more open. And I asked you about going to visit and about your family wanting to go to visit. And I think your comment was that, they worked hard to get out of Cuba, so there wasn't a real excitement to go back. And I'm wondering
Yes.
how that affects your father kind of talking about the book and like reflecting upon his memories there.
I think it is part of sort of the political conflict that I've struggled with him in complexifying these characters, in terms of, I've asked him, well, what sympathies did they have for like the protesters against Fulgencio and, the president? And he was like, well, they were in the family that was like, propped up. It was like he said, it's the version of the Kennedys and Cuba. So he's like, they wouldn't have been for, the Castro. And I was like, but that's not really, that's like a little bit oversimplifying, because I think we all have experiences where we might, support one side, but then really we still feel significant empathy and sympathy for other sides. So I think it's easier for him now to understand sort of our interest, because he's also, he's getting a little bit older too, and, wants to remember his past and, think about everything that happened. But he still does not want to go to Cuba. He's still uninterested.
Annie, the question I was going to ask, by the way, I don't want to hog this, people jump in, but it's picking up on something that Preston said. So, it's not just when you read your poems. When I read your poems, I read your voice. You've got a very, very, very distinctive voice when you write in those poems. Do you have to get into a mindset to write? Do you know what I mean? So because yeah. It really is, that's Annie's voice, and they're consistently like that, and it's fantastic. But I'm wondering how you do it.
I think part of it is just that, in my mind, all of my poems are about exactly the same thing, or they're all kind of variations on like 2 or 3 themes. So it's like, I never feel like I have to, like, I never think about the voice. It's just, it's me. I mean, obviously it's not me, it's a version of me, the poetic speaker version of me. But I think because my subjects feel really consistent, that's why the voice is really strong. Like, I certainly have a lot of poems that I've written like within the last year or so that I think are not as strong as many of those, because they're like, I started writing love poems and they're not good because they don't have any voice. They don't have a strong voice, because like, I don't know anything about writing love poems. So I don't do that. I just stick to like 3 themes, and that's how I achieve my voice.
I can understand that. Can I share what you told me?
Yes.
Annie got engaged.
Oh, congratulations.
Congratulations.
COVID engagement.
Yeah,
So
I know like 20 couples who've gotten engaged in the last.
Poems. That's why you don't write. You can't write.
Yeah. Well, it's like it's too close or something. I don't know. I've never. I feel like when I try to write love poems, they just sound like me as a terrible teenager, like in love, whatever. It's just not good. So I don't even try.
Did anyone notice that Audie's cat was nowhere to be seen until Annie started reading about birds? And then all of a sudden.
That's so funny.
She was very interested.
Audie, where are you a bookseller? I'm also a bookseller.
Oh, really? I work at Unabridged.
Oh, cool. I work at the seminary co-op.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, nice.
I have a question for you, Annie. I'm curious. You mentioned that there's a certain consistency or a couple themes that you tend to write about a lot. Do you find that you're writing like groups of poems at a time, or is it kind of more individualized one to the next, or are they kind of all alive and in the mix and within a similar time frame? I'm curious.
I think I often start, like I frequently have more than one poem started that I'm working on. And if I'm working on, say, two poems that are like about the same thing, then those poems just end up sounding the same. And frequently I'll end up, like just combining them, or like taking the best parts of each and making that one poem. So I definitely find it easiest to be working on simultaneously on things that are on different themes.
Gotcha.
Carly, I have a question for you about the novel in progress. Does it all take place? Is it the story of leaving Cuba? Is that the background of it?
Yeah, it's the story of her leaving Cuba and the relationship she developed with an American man that helped her leave Cuba. So he helped her get a visa, and it's about her and her son leaving Cuba.
It's all third person?
Yes. Yeah, it's all third person. I played around with second, but I was like, this is too awkward.
Yeah. Yeah. And do you feel like you're focusing mostly on, do you feel like you're splitting it evenly between the mom and the son, or do you feel like you focus mostly on the mom?
It's mostly on the mom. I think the fact that he's only 6, I think I'm going to keep it much more in her perspective and her fears than in his.
I'm excited to see it.
Thanks.
Yeah, Carly, I have also a question for you. Like earlier you talked about as a fiction writer, like you find it easier to like add imagination or like fiction to the prose, even though it's based on a true story. And I'm really curious if you could kind of go into detail a bit more about that. I know for me, I kind of teeter along the line sometimes. And I find it really challenging to know when to add, an assumption of an assumption that I have of what a character would do, versus like what they actually did, or when to add that. So I'm really curious if you could elaborate a little bit.
Definitely. So I just will never call my work nonfiction generally. I think that there's so much more freedom in calling it fiction. And some of my closest friends write nothing but nonfiction. And the conversations I always have with them are really helpful because they talk about their truth, and sort of like their personal experience. I remember reading a nonfiction, me attempting to do a nonfiction piece when I was like a little bit younger and reading it to my family, and they're like, that's not how that happened at all. And so I think it's that I know that I need a character to be fully rounded out. I need it to be a full character. I need to, understand what it is that this character would be doing. And so the pieces that I don't have, I'm used to from fiction, that I would need those things. Thankfully it's become much more of a practice, issue than like a talent, right? This is my 5th book that I'm writing. So I think that it just helps to know what I think a character should be like, and then be able to shoot for that.
Yeah, definitely. That reminds me of, I went to a reading from Luminarts with Rebecca Mackay on The Great Believers. And she mentioned something similar and talked a lot about the importance of research when it's a fiction book, but based on a true story or based on real aspects of someone's life. And I just find that really interesting how writers approach it, because it can be a very careful, like it feels like a very meticulous line. And it's just really cool that you're, you know, taking inspiration from your family history and their stories. So that's awesome. Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, I think too, there's always a surprise too to hear that, you know, so many fiction writers do that amount of research for any books that they do, right? And that's generally how I write, you know, fiction, is with that extensive level of research. Partly, you know, I joke that it's partly because I don't want to write just about my culture, whatever my culture is. I joke that I'm like the worst Cuban American ever, because I don't know Spanish. I haven't come to any interest in my family history until recently. So I think it's just like, I think a lot of us probably experience this innate curiosity and wanting to learn more and wanting to fill those strange and fantastic things into our work.
Yeah, totally. Thank you.
You've been to Cuba?
No, I've never been to Cuba.
Chance
Yeah.
to do research.
Yeah, I was looking into going there. Maybe after the pandemic, maybe I'll find a way. But right now, it doesn't seem very likely given the state of things.
So just to share with you on to Annie, I asked both Carley and Annie to give me their bios, and I only read a little bit of it. But in Annie's, I'm going to read just the part that I missed out. Annie Diamond is a poet, Joycean, and breakfast enthusiast. Joycean. So as soon as I read this, I went straight back, because I'm fanatical Joyce myself. And I went back and I said, oh my God, have you been to Dublin? And you have. And I said, have you been to Trieste? And that's on your bucket list, I think, isn't it, Annie?
Yeah.
Havana to do, Carley, and Trieste.